All right, guys, here we go for chapter 2, Mementos. Geez, Luther said, it is a fort. They were standing outside a 3-story building made of black granite blocks. It's actually Wolf's house, Marty said, and it's a little less forbidding on the inside, but not by much. Hey, you don't really have an incurable rash, do you? Du jour, Luther said. But when I took your present out of my pack, I managed to open the itching powder Brenda Scrimmins invented in chemistry class. Those guys are going to think they have an incurable rash as soon as they go through my stuff. Marty laughed. He and Luther were going to have a blast if the bullet heads didn't shoot his friend before they even shipped out. Wolf's massive stone house sat atop a high promontory overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Luther walked over to the edge of the cliff and looked down. Marty joined him. How far is Kryptos from the Washington coast? Luther asked. About 150 miles, Marty answered. So it is part of the Washington state? Is it part of the United States? Of course, Marty said, but he didn't really know. He'd heard that the island had been a secret base during World War II, and that Wolf had gotten it in an exchange for some work he and Ted Bronson had done for the government. Grace had tried to find the island on a nautical map, but it was as if the island didn't exist. The name Kryptos came from the word cryptic, which means secret, and there were certainly a lot of secrets on this island. So, how's the birthday girl? Luther asked. Marty thought about the question for a second, then said, Grace is not the same Grace you knew at Omega Prep. I figured that, Luther said. I mean, when you and she left school, she was your twin sister. Now it turns out she's your cousin. There's more to it than that, Marty said. A lot more. Notice, I circled cryptic, and it actually means secret. Okay, so here we're looking at that, our normal prefix, suffix, roots that we were discussing the other day, right? So we have cryptic, and this is important to know that it means secret, right? Because we're learning about cryptids on Kryptos, okay? All right, so to continue on. So Grace was in the library. She was as excited as Marty about Luther's arrival, but for different reasons. Marty hadn't mentioned it much, but she knew she was worried about their parents, his parents. She corrected herself mentally. Some days, she still had to remind herself that she was now Grace Wolf, not Grace O'Hara. Luther's presence on the island and aboard the Colin Cloth would be a welcome diversion for Marty, something to keep his mind off the ongoing tragedy. And Grace thought selfishly, with Luther there, she might be able to get something accomplished. She loved Marty, but she had a tendency to dominate every waking moment of her life. She'd barely had time to think since they had returned from the Congo. The dinosaur eggs were nothing compared to what she had discovered about herself and her past. But then Marty and Luther burst into the library. Grace watched Luther dart around the large room like a hungry mosquito, taking in everything at once with open-mouthed enthusiasm. He had more energy than any other human being she had ever met. It was as if he were on fire beneath his pale, freckled skin. Back at Omega Prep, they used to make bets on how long he could remain seated in the chair. 8 minutes and 36 seconds was his record, and the only reason he lasted that long was because the headmaster, Dr. Bartholomew Beazle, was standing above him, ready to push him back down if he popped up. Oddly enough, Luther was just the opposite when he slept. Waking him was like trying to rouse a corpse. Luther's first stop was the one of the 2 large saltwater aquariums bracketing the giant fireplace at the far end of the library. Colin Claus, huh? He said, tapping the thick glass. With those arm scales, they look medieval, like they're ready to joust. They just sit there most of the time, Marty said. They're kind of boring. But not these, Luther said, rushing over to the second tank. Squid. A common variety, Marty explained. Wolf caught them off the end of the dock one night. He used a flashlight to attract them, and when they rose to the surface, he just scooped them up with a net. But we're going after the giant squid in New Zealand, Luther said. In Nordic mythology, they're called kraken. Suddenly, they lived off the coast of Scandinavian countries and attacked ships. I've been doing some reading about them. Tyson even wrote a poem about them back in the 19th century. I can't remember how it goes, but their scientific name is the kraken, and the giant squid may not be the same animal, Grace said. The kraken might be a cryptid. The giant squid is not. You know the giant squid exists, and the scientific name is Archithumus. Luther looked around in confusion. He couldn't see her. Marty pointed his index finger at the ceiling. Luther looked up, and for once he was speechless. Grace was balanced on the middle of a high wire, stretched tautly between the rails surrounding the circular second-floor library, 18 feet above their heads. From aloft, she recited the opening lines of Tyson's poem. Below the thunders of the upper deep, far, far beneath in the abysmal sea, his ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep, the kraken sleepeth. What the heck are you doing up there? Luther asked. Focusing, Grace answered. There's no net. If you fall, you'll break your neck. I won't fall, Grace said. She spread her arms and started walking backward on the wire toward the rail. How was your flight? Rough, Luther answered. They made me stay in my seat. They must have been hard all the way from Switzerland. Yeah, I brought all your diaries. My moleskins? Grace said. Thank you. I told you she had changed, Marty said. Yeah, Luther said. But you didn't tell me that she had joined the circus. Grace reached the rail, climbed over, and made her way to the spiral staircase leading to the ground. She joined the boys in front of the squid tank. Happy birthday, Luther said. Thank you. How'd you learn to... Luther pointed at the wire. You know. Laura Lee taught me, Grace said. I started out low and worked my way up. It's helped me learn to focus and overcome some of my fears. Marty's right, Luther thought. Grace had changed. He looked at Marty. You told me Dr. Lee was a cultural anthropologist. You didn't mention that she was an acrobat, too. Guess it slipped my mind, Marty said. Luther looked back at Grace. Is Dr. Lee here? I wish she were, Grace said sadly. She's still in Africa. So what do you plan for your birthday? I don't know, Grace said. That's not up to me. Luther grinned and pulled a sketchbook out from under his sweatshirt. I made something for you. Well, it's actually for both of you. And Marty. But mostly you, because it's your birthday. He took out the pad of the laboratory bench and cleared the space. Marty and Grace joined him. It's a graphic novel of what happened to you in the Congo, Luther explained. Of course, I wasn't there, so all I had to do was go on what Marty told me. It's a little crude, and I'm not as good as an artist as Marty, but... Oh, stop it, Luther, Grace said. Just show us. Luther opened the pad. The first drawing was a helicopter crashing in the jungle. Marty and Grace stared at the image in silence. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, Luther said. No, it's fine, Marty said. He pointed at the drawing. That's my parents crashing in South America. Yeah, well, that's what started all of this. You guys leaving school, going to live with your uncle, Marty's uncle. So I figured, Luther hesitated, then asked, has there been any news? Marty shook his head. But Wolf still has people looking. He won't give up. And I think they're still alive, Grace nodded. If they weren't, I'd know. She looked at Marty with her robin's eyes blue eggs. Robin's egg blue eyes. Silly me. So she has very blue eyes, okay? I would feel it. Luther looked away. Marty's parents had been missing for more than 6 months in the Brazilian rainforest, one of the most hostile areas on the planet. The chances of their still being alive were just about zero. If Grace says they're alive, then I think they're alive, Marty said. So don't sweat it. Let's do the rest of the drawings. Luther began flipping pages. Marty was not impressed with Luther's drawings, but the story they told was pretty accurate, considering that Luther had pieced it together from the few emails Marty had sent him during and after this ordeal. The next drawing showed Marty and Grace landing on Kryptos Island to meet Travis Wolf, the uncle they didn't know they had, followed by the arrival of Dr. Laura Lee from the Congo with an egg the size of a soccer ball, belonging to the legendary Milkamum, the last living dinosaur. As Luther continued to turn the pages, Marty looked over at Grace. The last few months had been a shock for him, but they had completely turned Grace's life upside down. To learn that she had actually been born in the Congo, that Wolf was in fact her father, and had given her to his sister and her husband, Marty's parents, to raise as their own child. That he had done this to protect her from her own grandfather, world-famous conservationist Noah Blackwood. The whole story was pretty incredible. Grace was handling it well, all things considered. Marty turned back to Luther's graphic novel. See, this is supposed to be Butch McCall, that guy who works for your grandfather, Luther was telling Grace. The guy who kidnapped me, Grace clarified. Marty, Grace, and Luther spent the next half an hour reading the rest of Luther's masterpiece, which concluded with Wolf, Laura Lee, and Bertha Bishop commandeering Noah Blackwood's helicopter, stranding Noah and Butch McCall in the Congo, and returning triumphantly to Cryptus Island with the Mogum eggs. It's great, Marty said. Really. It's excellent, Grace said. You put a lot of work into this. It's just a draft, Luther said, flushing a little. He looked at Marty. I thought we could spruce it up on our way to New Zealand. Sure, Marty said. We could add a few things here and there, and might be able to touch up some of the illustrations a little. Meaning, I'm completely retarded them, he thought. But it is a great piece of work, considering Luther drew it from Switzerland, thousands of miles north of the Congo. We have something for you, too, Marty said, opening one of the cabins beneath the laboratory bench. But it's not my birthday, Luther protested. Marty ignored him. One of the problems was getting Luther anything was that Luther had everything, at least everything he wanted. His absentee parents made sure of that. Another problem was that Luther didn't want much and was not interested in normal things. Marty set a glass jar filled with salt on top of the bench. How thoughtful, Luther said. A salt shaker. That's the one thing I didn't bring with me from Omega Prep. Just open it, Marty said. Luther carefully unscrewed the lid, then dipped his little finger into the white crystals and touched it to his tongue. Sodium chloride. Delicious. Right, Marty said. Salt. Dump it out. Luther dumped the contents into the lab sink. Buried in the salt was a desiccated object with fangs. He held it up and blew the salt off, tears welling in his eyes. This is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, Luther said. It's the head of the green mamba you killed in the Congo, right? Marty nodded. We thought you'd like it, he said, delighted at Luther's reaction, but not surprised. It's from both Grace and me. The venom sacs are still intact, so I would keep it in the jar if I were you. Luther put the snake head back in the jar and scooped most of the salt back on top of it. I don't know what to say. Marty was about to tell him that it was no big deal when the library door burst open. Travis Wolf strode in, accompanied by Al Ikes. Wolf was smiling, Al was frowning. They made an odd couple. Wolf was a giant, well over 6 foot tall, with unruly black hair and a bushy black beard. He wore a gray sweatshirt, baggy cargo pants, and size 15 sneakers. Al was clean-shaven and dressed in a 3-piece suit and polished wingtips, and the top of his carefully groomed brown hair barely reached Wolf's broad shoulder. This is my friend Luther Smith, Marty said to Wolf, totally ignoring the perpetually irked Al Ikes. Wolf smiled, broadened as he stepped forward and shook Luther's hand. Welcome aboard, he said, and I'm glad you're here. Thanks for inviting me, Luther said. He stole a quick glance at Wolf's right leg, which had been bitten off by a mokomama in the Congo when Grace was 2 years old. In his place, Wolf wore a high-tech prosthesis invented by a mysterious Ted Bronson. We had a little change of plans, Wolf said. We'll be sailing tonight. Tonight? Grace and Marty said. They often spoke in unison like twins, even though they were no longer twins. That's because they're cousins. Wolf nodded. We're going to need to get your gear down to the ship as soon as possible. What about Grace's birthday? Marty asked. I was going to bake a cake. You'll have to bake it aboard ship, Wolf said. We'll have a birthday party after we're underway. And there's another problem, Al said, glaring at Marty. Did you leave the keys in your four-wheeler? Marty checked his pockets. The keys weren't there. One of Al's security measures was that the keys to all vehicles on Cryptos were to be taken out of the ignitions. Marty had an idea why this was important. Where could a car thief go on a tiny island? Sorry, Marty said. I'd run out to get them. Al shook his head. It's too late. The four-wheeler has been stolen. By who? Marty asked. Not by who, Al answered. By it. Marty glanced at Wolf, who was doing his best to stop himself from laughing. It was what Al called Bo. He hated the chimpanzee, and the feeling was mutual. Bo delighted in tweaking Al and his men whenever and wherever she could. And she had that little dog with her, Al added. That little dog was PD, short for pocket dog, and 3-pound teacup poodle who jumped into pockets when she heard the word snake because she was terrified of the reptiles. Bo and PD were best friends, and Bo was always carrying the tiny poodle around on her adventures. I didn't know Bo knew how to drive a four-wheeler, Marty said. From the reports we've gotten, she doesn't drive it very well, Wolf said. You and Luther better go out and try to catch her before she kills herself or something else. Or someone else. Luther's gear is already on the ship. While we're out chasing the renegade chimp, Grace can pack your stuff. When you catch up with Bo, take her and PD down to Kollenkoff. But I'm warning you ahead of time. Bo is terrified of ships, especially the Kollenkoff. Marty didn't blame her. He and Bo were the only ones on the island who had any sense about the haunted ship. Is her tracking tag active, he asked. I'm afraid not, Wolf answered. I hadn't had time to put it on another subcutaneous tag. It's a good word, subcutaneous. Compatible with the new gizmos. Subcutaneous. Yeah, under the skin. Because under, means under. Cutaneous is the skin, so under the skin. Marty answered, if she had to wear one around her neck like we do, she'd just tear it off. Marty looked back at his uncle. So how am I supposed to find and catch her? Wolf grinned. She's the only chip on the island riding a four-wheeler, and I'm sure you'll figure something out. Al looked at his watch. If we're going to ship out tonight, I have things to attend to. Nice to meet you, Albert, Luther said. Al glared at him and hurried out of the library. I wonder if he's going to wear three-piece suits on board the Kollenkoff, Marty said. What do you want me to pack? Grace asked. I haven't even unpacked since we got back from the Congo. Just put the loose stuff into my bags. He looked at Luther. We'd better go. There's another four-wheeler parked outside, Wolf said. And don't forget to wear your helmets. Marty doubted Bo and PD had helmets, but he and Luther slipped theirs on and ran out of the library. Wolf watched them go, shaking his head, then turned his attention to the high wire stretched across the balcony. That makes me very nervous, he said. Don't worry, Grace said. I'm very careful when I'm up there. Maybe when we get back, we can set up something in the hangar with a net below it, just in case. Good idea, Grace said. Then changed the subject. So how's Congo? Congo was the African gray parrot they had brought back with them from the continent. He had belonged to Grace's mother, Rose. Noah Blackwood's henchman, Butch McCall, had broken Congo's wing when the parrot tried to stop him from kidnapping Grace. Her father, Travis Wolf, was not only a biologist, oceanographer, and cryptozoologist, he was also a veterinarian. His bones mended well, Wolf replied. I took the bandages off and sent him down the Kollenkoff along with the Molkumang eggs, secretly, of course. We still don't want anyone to know about the eggs. It will be a while before Congo can use his wing, but he'll be flying around soon. I thought you wanted to wait for the eggs to hatch before we left for New Zealand, Grace said. I did. It would be a lot better to have them hatch on the island than in the open sea, but a little problem has come up. An uncharacteristic look of worry flashed across Wolf's rugged but handsome face. Your grandfather, Noah Blackwood, got back to Seattle last night, he said.